thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak about my work. It's a great honour. I'm not going to say anything for a few minutes while this video plays. It goes on for a few minutes, so I'll start now. Just over the more than 50 years I've been making things, I've worked in different ways, and I've worked on my own in my studio. I've collaborated on many different projects. I ran a business part-time. I've taught in universities and run workshops for over 45 years. And I've curated a few shows. And my work has fitted into different contexts. And I've made work in response to specific challenges and in response to and for specific locations. I think my main interest is in the possibilities of how material explorations can somehow reflect a state of mind or have an emotional charge. And the several threads of ideas that I've explored over the years, ideas of what the body comes into contact with, the sense of touch, the act of looking, and about the intrigue of playing with or interfering with the act of looking.
Caroline, could you please speak a little
Oh yeah,
louder?
okay, I will try, yes. Thank you. The portrayal of something insubstantial and doubles and duality. And the qualities of light, shadow and space are also involved. I aim for a visual clarity using basic techniques together with a range of readily available materials. This is one of 5 short videos from a recent project made in collaboration with Angela Woodhouse, and it was made in response to the pandemic, so with a particular emphasis on touch. We interviewed nurses from the intensive care department who'd cared for patients during COVID, and how their ideas about touch had changed. So we concentrated on an alertness to touching and not being able to touch, so both emotional contact and social contact. So the thermal imaging reveals temperatures that emerge and fade. It sometimes reveals particular biologies of individuals, and it reveals how the body is expanded through its impact on the immediate environment. And in contrast to showing kind of unseen and intimate aspects of the body, there's an element of anonymity. I'm not pressing it hard enough. Oh, that one. Okay. So the talk now is ordered more or less in chronological order. And in the early 70s, there was very little evidence of contemporary jewellery. And in England at that time, jewellery was slowly distinguishing itself from a conservative tradition. And it was a time of experiment and looking outwards towards other art forms. So by the time I left college, Electron Gallery in London had opened, showing international and inspirational work by Onno Buchart, Gijs Bakker, Emmy van Leersum, Gerd Rothman, etc. The UK Crafts Council was established, and it was supporting young, aspiring craftspeople, both with promotion and with finance. So it was a very good time to start a career in jewellery and crafts. So these were some in a series of knot necklaces, which I made soon after I left college. And they were an important breakthrough for me. They established a sort of jewellery I wanted to make, which I hadn't done up to then. So carving a hard material to look soft and flexible. And the one on the right, the silver part was flexible, so it could be wound round the carved part to hold the necklace in place. So the pieces were about cause and effect, and the heat of the body melting a necklace and causing one piece of jewellery to become two, and the broken brooch reflecting how jewellery is sometimes vulnerable to being dropped and broken. So one of the elements of the new jewellery, as contemporary jewellery was called at the time, was a form of rejection of the more conventional jewellery, and it was to eliminate jewellery findings. So the aim was to create structures that accommodated the body but also had an integrity without the body. So doing two things, having two identities. And these pieces offered a choice about where you would put your arm through. So there was a certain playfulness in how you could decide to wear things. And another impetus was to use, at that time, considered unorthodox and non-precious materials. And that, at the time, was quite radical. So choice of materials is really important. And nylon is an industrial material. And it's tough and indestructible, but it can also be quite delicate. So I liked its neutrality. And it was a material without an identifiable history. And it's flexible, it has a springiness which allows a structure to hold a form. So here the qualities of the material inspire the designs, but sometimes for me it's a balance between how a material inspires an idea and how an idea has to find a material to suit it. A trip through Africa made a great impact on my thoughts about jewellery. So when I came back from that trip, I was chasing qualities that would invite touch and feel good when worn. So there's a tactile quality that gives a certain sensation when putting on or taking off. I like the geometry in contrast to the body and the circle being held away from the arm and the combination of rigidity and flexibility. And at this point, it was when I fully committed myself to making jewellery. I hadn't quite made up my mind until then. So in order to make a living, I started teaching 2 days a week, and I started a part-time business with a colleague, Neue, and we made buttons for dress designers, and later we produced collections of jewellery. And we ran this for 17 years. So these activities allowed me less time to make what I call my work, but they also allowed me freedom from the requirement to sell work on a regular basis, which was important to me. The shafted pieces grew in size, and I was using hoops from embroidery frames, so the sizes were determined by what size those hoops were. And another impetus around that time was the attempt to make jewellery more accessible, to make multiples. There was a very influential exhibition of Dutch jewellery at Arnolfini in Bristol called Multiples, which I never got to see, but I got a copy of the catalogue. So my tufty earrings could be made in batches and in different colours, and I made very many of them. And when they're worn, they were often mistaken for hair, so part of the body. And this was the first piece I made that considered the boundary of the body, so pointing both inwards and outwards. And then I had twins, which made it even more imperative to earn a living and with less time to make things. And I think these kind of life changes they affect the way one works. So I had been working in the workshop in Covent Garden, but at this point I started to make my work at home, so I could work at different times and in short bursts. So this piece was creating a structure that could change shape and proportions. So it could twist upon itself and become self-supporting and more transparent, and it could be untwisted and squashed and worn down low. But it was also about looking and about what you can look at when there's a filter to interrupt your view. So whether you're looking at something or whether you're looking through it or out from it, I like that there could be a shift of focus. So a difference of attention and a possibility of meeting point in terms of looking. The veil is a contradiction, as it's used both for modesty and as well as titillation, and raises the question of whether a screen keeps what is being screened out of sight or whether it makes it more appealing to look at. So it was these theatrical elements that held my attention at the time. I was thinking about objects that could invite engagement and interaction, and also possibilities for fitting the body without a mechanical clasp. So this one could be twisted. That's what. So it could fit snugly around the neck, and the stays stopped it from unwinding. So I started making clothing almost by accident, but once I'd embarked on this as an area to explore, it was very exciting. Clothing represents a whole range of possibilities for expression of ideas. It's likened to a second skin, layers of wrapping, covering, protection, parceling, and a garment suggests the body as an absence or a presence. And it's often the reproduction in the form of a person, but without being a person, and that's what I wanted to work with. The fact that everyone wears clothes means there's a familiarity which gives an avenue for communication. So this piece could be worn with the lower half turned inside out on itself to create a double-skinned dress, which then could be twisted against the inner one to change the appearance, and the choice to twist it more, giving a tightly fitted dress. And I was also thinking about this piece being in the middle of a dilemma with two heads thinking in different directions but without any legs to be able to move. And when I first started making clothing forms, I wanted to make them wearable. So not necessarily as an everyday garment, but I wanted them to fit the body and have that possibility of being worn. So I had two ways of considering garments. Firstly, as static sculptural objects, and secondly, as dynamic forms working and moving or against the body. So this was one of a series of garments that inspired certain gestures associated with getting dressed. So it was putting the other arm in, so the garment wrapped around 3.5 times, starting with the thin, long sleeve and then ending with the wider one. So it gave a sense of being trapped or claustrophobic when wearing it, but it was also about a sense of liberty when you took it off. So like a snake sloughing a skin or leaving a trace of yourself. And I made these pieces with their own logic and criteria and with no special audience in mind. I really didn't know where they fitted in. My intention was not to stretch the boundaries of jewellery, but it was about following ideas to see where they led. So this was a similar idea, but putting your head through a garment, so forming a pleat across the body. And as I was working on these ideas, which took me about 2 or 3 years, I realised that the wearing side was not so important to me anymore, and a garment didn't have to be wearable. I could concentrate on expressing other ideas. And here I was thinking about the layers of clothing we all wear, from the garments worn next to the body, seen only by intimates, and the next outward layers, worn to be seen as a social being, and then outer protective layers for warmth or protection. So these layers of garments were laid out on a wall like specimens, mapping the degrees of intimacy. They were made in nylon encased in textile tape, which gave them a sort of a bounce. So they looked like drawings, but they were somehow in between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. And while I was making things, I was also exploring making images, so playing with ideas about clothing and how they might expose or reveal something about the person. So that was a photograph. And then the idea that clothing creates an identity for the wearer and so can represent a person. And I was thinking about how we have certain people who are present in our memory or our imagination, and how we're influenced by those people who we feel close to and how they shape us. This was the first collaboration I did with a choreographer. and Rosie and I didn't know each other when we started, and we didn't know each other's work. So it really was a baptism of fire. And it was made over 3 weeks in the Royal Festival Hall, so it was quite an important venue and very fast. So there were 9 dancers, so I made 9 dresses, and then there were 9 children, and I made 9 outfits for them as well. So it was very nice to work with a moving body as opposed to rather the gallery pieces I was making at the same time. So this one was a series of white dresses, and I had started to concentrate on the dress, so how it can be a metaphor for a person as it looks both ways, inwardly touching the body and outwardly facing the world. So it was becoming the boundary of the self, which is continually being questioned and disrupted and redefined. And it's here that any tensions or conflicts or contradictions can manifest themselves. The dress signifies the possibility of dressing up, showing a different side of oneself, and it can represent the whole person in a way I think no other form of garment can. And although it's a gendered garment, the conditions I was expressing were not. I was thinking about how the dress can be representative of a psychological state. So here the surface of the dress is shifting and hard to define. There's a pull and a push. The ever-changing nature of a personality. And I was also thinking about the way films do a kind of a wobbly thing when they move from one state of reality to another and everything shifts. So this is picking up ideas that I used in Stranded, but using them in a different context. So again, the surface of the dress is a membrane for inner and outer tensions. Just to show you how this idea grew, these skirts were made on a much larger scale. They were about 5 meters in diameter, worn by male dancers. And the sticks and the choice of fabric may cause them to move even after the dancers had stopped. It was a project made in response to Spencer's Corset Factory in Banbury, where they made undergarments and surgical supports, and usually made to measure. And one of the men who'd worked there had kept a huge amount of historical documents from the factory, so advertisements and instructions to the fitters, etc., which has formed the basis of our research. So we use the ideas of restriction and control and altering the silhouette of the body. And this is... In the 18th century, the big skirts were stored up above, so we used that idea, the crinolines. And then this was the first time I worked with Angela Woodhouse, and since this was maybe 25 years ago, we've since made about 10 works together. And it was the first time also I'd made work in response to a historic building. It was in Upnor Castle, a 17th century garrison on the River Medway in Kent. And the opportunity gave us time to visit and research the history of the place. And again, the research formed the basis of the piece. So Upnor Castle was an important lookout post defending the river, but it was unsuccessful in resisting the Dutch fleet who sailed through to Chatham and burnt many English boats. So we organised the performance as a promenade, with the viewers being divided into smaller groups, so they visited short dance events and in different locations around the castle. There were restrictions about how we could or could not use the building. English Heritage, who owned the building, wouldn't allow any fixings or any interference with the building. So in order to comply, I made the dress fit the room. And it was inspired by a female presence, which, and obviously women worked in the garrison, but they were unrecorded in the archives. The viewers came down those steps and were obliged to step on the dress. And this allowed the dancer to move in a particular way, so to pull away. And so the viewers acted both as invader and anchor, and as such became an integral part of the dance. So I'm aware that your clothes are part of you in a social situation, and if you sit down next to somebody and accidentally sit on their garments, there's a moment when you readjust and keep your own garments to yourself. So the idea of trespassing on the dancer's dress was to offer a personally felt experience of maybe leading to a recognition of how much larger and more dangerous conflicts arise. I had a period of rethinking my work, and I thought I'd come to the limit of what I could do with the dress, and I was looking for another starting point. And I got very interested in the shadow, how it's seen as the dark side of someone, and conversely, it's also a very precious part of you. So I read books about the shadow, and I watched films to see how shadows were used to create tension and fear. And in such stories as Peter Pan or Peter Schlemmel, if you become separated from your shadow, the outcome is painful or catastrophic, and there's a need to be reunited with it. And I found out about superstitions about shadows, where you should never allow your shadow to fall. It's very bad luck to have your shadow fall onto an open grave or across deep water, etc. So I made a number of photographs where I tried to place my shadow in the most dangerous places in my locality, and here it was in a road where there was fast-moving traffic. And as I worked through ideas about shadows, I came back to the dress, but placing the emphasis not on the object, but on the insubstantial image. And the first dresses were smaller than life size. I wanted them to be self-supporting, so standing up with a shadow at right angles. And the shadows were drawn or painted into to give more information about the dress. So whether that exposed the inside of the dress, or whether the shadow seemed to be a source of illumination rather than darkness. And the print on a dress becomes the outermost layer of a garment, and one that could be separated or replaced. And the floral print dress it carries a wealth of social tastes, hierarchies, categories, and here it's a generic one. But it shows femininity as being something attractive, sweet, and fertile. But it's like an off-register print. And it was the beginning of making work in a gallery situation. I was painting and drawing on the walls and getting to know about different lighting and making crucial decisions at the last moment. So I did a lot of work with dresses and shadows, and I'd been using artificial lighting with a distance I could measure between the light source and the strength of the light. But here the light source was imaginary, and I liked the thought that the piece intimated a connection between something very far away like the sun or the moon and the place where you were standing. And I had initiated this piece while I was doing a residency in Vienna, where the basement studio was quite cold, and I sat in a patch of light coming in through the window. And as the sun moved around, I had to move my chair to keep warm. So here the light stayed in one place, just as it would do in a photograph. And the material was knitting elastic, very fine silicone and very stretchy. And it was nailed to a temporary window surround and then stitched into the carpet where the light supposedly fell. And then I dusted talcum powder on where the light fell. So these ones were 7 dresses from life size to small, made of wire and textile, each casting a shadow of more or less the same dimensions onto the wall. And as they were at different distances from the light, they gave a range of sharp and dark shadows and blurred lighter shadows. So giving the impression on the wall of a drawing that had been rubbed out and drawn over. And when people walked past, the shadow drawing sort of moved a bit, which was quite nice, made it to come alive. This was about 150 lines suspending a dress, so it held in tension between the ceiling and the floor. And in the West, the tradition of pattern cutting means that the clothes can closely follow the shape of the body. So there's an internal space, and so this one creates the volume of a body inside, but unable to move. And around this time, I was very interested in things that didn't make sense, things that made you look twice or didn't appear as you might expect. So there were 2 dresses made of tulle, very fine net. So one has a leopard skin print and the other one doesn't, while the shadow of the printed dress is plain, it's clear, and the shadow of the plain dress has a leopard skin print, which was drawn onto the wall. So there was a visual confusion. Some of my work has explored 2 points of view. So here there's the horizontal and the vertical. These are charcoal drawings of my 3 daughters. They were made on the floor, tracing their shadow as they stood on the paper, and then the drawings were hung on the wall. So the feet that you can see at the bottom are their actual dimensions, but the shadow of their heads are larger and blurrier as they move further away from the light. And they were all at the age of leaving home and becoming very independent. I'm aware of shadows that fall on people when there's a light above. So wearing a kind of a replica of themselves, a picture of themselves as a sort of necklace. So these were self-portraits, capturing my shadow. Another piece with Angela, and this was conceived as a touring piece, so it was made so that it could be packed up fairly quickly and laid out in different spaces. This one was done in the Royal Opera House in London, and it's a carpet of mirrors with a space in the middle and small channels for the solo dancer to step through. So she performed in silence, often with closed eyes for much of the time, and she began by standing in the centre, and the viewers were stood around the edge, but they were free to move around. So again, this was about looking, about being seen, and there was a choice of looking directly at the dancer or at other viewers, or indirectly at the dancer's double in the mirrors. Stina, the dancer, ran around the space very fast at one point so that the viewers could feel the air move and hear the sound of her feet and her breath. And although she was isolated when she was standing inside the mirrors, she also approached one or 2 of the viewers very closely. So the ideas were about creating a sense of isolation and a sense of community, an alertness to sound and silence, movement and stillness, and proximity and distance. So I co-curated an exhibition at Central St Martin's to show the work of staff who worked in the jewellery, textiles and material futures areas. They all made different things, and we tried to find a theme that encompassed all of them. And in the end, we decided to focus on the temperatures needed to make art, whether that was the firing of ceramics, enamels, growing biological material, etc. And as my work did not need any particular temperature, I hired a thermal camera to see if there was anything I could work with. So these were some of the tests, transferred warmth onto the surroundings. And these two images were the result of those tests. So it was me standing on a wooden floor, heating the floor with my feet, and then the hot lamp kept my shadow cooler than the surroundings. So the images gave a strange sense of me being there, but also not being there. Also about looking and not looking. So Angela and I were invited to produce a dance work in response to Jenny Holzer's Artist Room. And the works that Jenny Holzer showed were made following the declassification of the US government documents relating to the Middle East. So her paintings showed the number of redactions as these documents were published, which were many, and revealed the extent of secret information. So we worked with what could be seen and what could not be seen, secrecy and cover-up. We divided the viewers so that they stood in the taped areas at either end of the gallery space, and this allowed only one half of the viewers to witness certain gestures by the dancers, and these were hidden from the other half. The dancer wore a sort of mask, which referenced the way in which newspapers at the time covered somebody's identity with a black rectangle so they couldn't be identified. And the sort of militaristic outfit was in transparent material. This was a number of videos that Angela and I made using the thermal camera, and how we use these. There's different settings so that you can choose the colours, and the dark blue is the coldest, and the red hot is the hottest. So we looked at how one body could influence another, and the effect on it. And I'm just going to show you a small bit of the video. I hope it's going to start. So the piece I showed at the beginning came after this, and it was revisited in the light of COVID and the kind of awareness of touch, which we'd explored in this piece. Another piece I did with Angela, so I made a coat that was accommodated two people. So there was a lovely moment where they both got into the coat. And another moment from the same performance where Martina, the dancer, very slowly and from under her t-shirt takes off her vest. So there's a tension about the intimacy of taking off clothes in front of an audience. And she selects a member of the audience to offer the vest, so giving out her warmth and a chance to feel the body remotely. And using jewellery to create tension, this dance piece was performed in silence and in very low light, so the dancers could stand anywhere they liked. So the pearl necklace was stretched very, very taut and exaggerated the distance between two people moving away from each other and just connected by a string of pearls. And that was another piece from the same piece, which was a moment of tension when the dancer pulls her necklace and the pearls fall and scatter and bounce, which broke the quiet atmosphere. And I was interested in using the pearl necklace for its connotations of decorum and dignity, and actually sort of being disobedient and disruptive. So the red chair on the left was the first work I made using a second-hand chair, and I've done a lot since. And chairs bring to mind ordinary, possibly calm and agreeable activities such as sitting down to rest, to work, to eat, etc. And they've got parts such as the seat, the back, the arms, the legs, feet, etc., all relating to the human body. And the dimensions of a chair reflect the dimensions of the body. I'm very interested in the boundary of something where it becomes something else, and I was thinking how I could mark the boundary of this chair, but only from one point of view. So if you moved a bit, the red outline disconnects. And when you line it up, it seems to jump and kind of flatten it to a two-dimensional image. And then this chair has its outline taken away. Just looking at the surface of the chair and how that changes with the environment that it's in. So that's light coming in from a window. My daughter Maisie and I were invited to do an exhibition together at Marsden Gallery in London, and we decided to work together on a theme that interested both of us, but with each of us making independent work. So Maisie studied jewellery at university, but she ended up concentrating on photographic works. And these involve a huge amount of set building, costumes, props, as well as post-production. So she'd been reinterpreting old masters' paintings with a contemporary angle, and I'd been working with second-hand chairs. So we decided to combine these themes, and we chose a number of paintings, each with a significant empty chair. The chairs indicated a presence or an absence of someone, a sense of disorder if they were upturned. So I interpreted the chairs in 3 dimensions, and Maisie interpreted them in her images. So we chose a couple of Hogarth's paintings from his Marriage à la Mode series. And this series of 6 paintings was a satirical look at the breakdown of a marriage, an arranged marriage, its spiralling debt and the lack of morals in the upper classes. And so the upturned chairs represented this dissolution of values and impending disaster. So this was my interpretation of that chair. So it's a very humble wooden chair, but with a grand outer layer, which was very flimsy, representing the situation. The outer layer of my chair followed the contours and the colours of the chair in the painting, with its indication of padded velvet luxury. But as mine was made of transparent fabric, it showed the disconnect with the very ordinary wooden chair inside. And then this was Maisie's picture. So Maisie often uses herself or her family as models. So here Maisie and I appear twice. So we're both the upper class couple and the servants. And this is the last of the 6 paintings in Marriage à la Mode, where the wife, the lady, is dying of syphilis, and everything is collapsing. So that was the chair that I made for it. And then this was Maisie's picture with the family and the dog involved. And the third example was, this is Velázquez's portrait of a, I think, 3 or 4-year-old prince and much longed for male heir to the throne, but he was not a healthy child, so he didn't last very long. And Velázquez painted other portraits of children and royal family, and this little boy had his hand painted in a very limp position, indicating perhaps his ill health. So this was my chair with a child's chair inside and a beaded exterior, kind of following the the upholstery and the studding. And then this was once more Casper, as a more or less the same age as, but luckily he's now 15 and very healthy. So I like the fact that chairs represent something we rely on for support and that take our weight. And what happens when we don't? There's a sense of not being able to rely on what we have become used to, something on the brink of collapse. I thought of this as packaging of a space that the chair might occupy. So it's just done in very, very thin plywood. So it doesn't weigh anything at all, really. But inside there's a space, there's the volume of a chair. And this was made during a residency at the National Glass Centre in Sunderland, which unfortunately is in danger of being closed down. But it's got all the facilities for making all sorts of things out of glass. And this was, I didn't make the glass. It was Brian Jones, the lamp worker, making them for me. But again, it was the idea of the chair that could not be relied on. But the original parts are the ones that touch the body, the seat and the back, and then the ones that going to show the potential for failure or lack of confidence in the supporter glass. And then going back a bit in time, but for a while now I've been making things out of beads, and this was the beginning of my fascination with it. I was among the jewelers attending the Walking the Grey Area conference in Mexico City in 2010, and many of us were stranded there because of the Icelandic volcano eruption that cancelled flights for several days. And afterwards, curator Joe Bloxham invited us to make a piece of jewellery as a response to this experience for an exhibition called Under That Cloud. And I was quite challenged by this invitation, as I'd not made any jewellery for a long time. So I thought of the souvenirs that I'd brought back, and I'd been really impressed by the tradition of beading there. And I bought some bracelets, one of which is on the left-hand side. I'd gone to see some lucha libre wrestling, which is a very theatrical event, with the wrestlers wearing costumes and masks with their invented identity on. And a match results in a winner being unmasked at the end. So it seemed to be a massive insult to the loser to have his identity exposed. So I placed my selfie within a Mexican bracelet as a sort of unmasking as a non-jeweler at the time. And this was from 1970s somewhere, going to Africa. But I brought back quite a lot of beaded jewellery from then, which it became much more significant having started to do my own beads. Such abundance and colour, really quite amazing. And having done a lot of pieces using glass beads, I was thinking about how I could make my own beads. So I found an old stool and cut it up and threaded it back together again. And carving it up meant I could see the inside, so I could find the holes, the joints, and the fillers and the layers of paint. So I had chosen this one that was painted because I like the idea of the surface or the skin of it and the substance to be seen as separate. So it was a collapse of a familiar thing, and it's made flexible and vulnerable. And that's a detail. Again, made during the pandemic and for an exhibition called Cold Sweat, which was in Lisbon for the first Biennale, exploring fear and protection. So life seemed to be suspended and in limbo, and so these weren't able to function as they might have done, the string of pearls. But I'm also aware that jewellery is more often than not worn, and it's kept out of reach and away from the body. I often go to flea markets, and I'm interested in the process of that loss and gain. So something that's been abandoned and something that's been recovered. So an unwanted necklace here is thrown away, allowing somebody else to find it on a market stall. Or a necklace has been dropped and is picked up and maybe accumulating a sense of history where what it comes into contact with and what effect that might generate. So I'm intrigued by the change of character from a hard and brittle material, glass, to a flexible one, and how one material might mimic another. So blanket was made again in response to COVID-19 lockdown situation that we had in the UK. And it was like going into a void because we quite quickly got closed down for 12 weeks. Everything stopped, and so it was something I wanted to do to mark that period of time and to keep me busy. So I made a square a day and then stitched them together. So it was the blankets that I'd been involved as a child, where you could knit 1 or 2 squares and somebody else stitched them together for somebody in need. But I like the idea that the contradiction of something that might be warm and comforting is made of something cold and hard. That's a detail. And the second lockdown, another 12-week stint, which I wouldn't have made this if it hadn't been for that, because it allowed me to make something that marked that whole time. So it's a magic carpet, it's called, and I suppose I was feeling like it would be so lovely to be transported somewhere else at the time. And then visiting Lisbon for the first time a few years ago, I was absolutely enchanted by the tiled buildings. And one of the students in the workshop I was giving told me about how thieves were knocking ancient tiles off buildings to sell for quite a lot of money and on the black market. So I checked out the most expensive antique Portuguese tiles on eBay and selected a few to reproduce. I didn't buy them, I just took the image. So my tiles shared similar colours and patterns and vitreous surfaces and the scale of the original tiles. But there's a shift from a hard external casing of a building to a flexible, delicate hanging, and reflecting the change from a fixed position to a scattered location. And I like the idea that the tiles form a sort of mosaic over a building, and the beads form a sort of mosaic on the little tiles. I suppose pearls, as lots of other things that are considered valuable, have many imitations, and I like the idea of one sort of bead portraying another sort of bead. So when this piece is stretched out and the image is lost, there's got to be some manipulation to get it back again. Here's another one. Again, I like the idea that there's 2 necklaces here which just become one. And here I was thinking about how a pearl is made within a shell, so the mother of pearl. I made the beads out of the surface, so there's nothing inside. So it was the idea of leaving a non-existent or an empty necklace inside this void. And they're made from vintage Chinese gambling tokens. And I was thinking about the original way that pearls were found, so by diving down in a quite dangerous and risky way to bring shells up, and only then finding out whether you've won a pearl. And again, 2 necklaces in one, so, and the idea of the pearls being in the wrong place, or maybe the catch has come apart and they're falling, something breaking. Again, I go to markets, I buy a lot of old jewellery, and I like the idea of something that's been on somebody's neck once upon a time, you don't know who, but it's being transported or transposed for somebody else's neck. And this one's just got little nuggets of amber trapped inside. And this is the one that's been chosen for the Neue Craft Prize finalist exhibition. And that's my granddaughter wearing it. So that's the last slide. Thank you.